Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is August 30th in the year of the Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. I'm back today. Yesterday, because of scheduling of some of the things that my wife and I wanted to do for our anniversary on Friday, didn't happen. And so we went up yesterday to Williamsport. If you follow me on Facebook, you just look up Dan Clements on Facebook, and that's my Facebook feed. Plus, I have a show feed there also, the Dan Clements Show. I got a page. Anyway, I shared some pictures of the Hiawatha. It's a paddle wheel boat. Now, technically, the paddle wheels do not drive it. That used to back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But that boat was destroyed by ice jams one winter. And so some society up there got together, raised money to buy a new boat. It's driven by two diesel engines, but they have a paddle wheel on the back that does turn as they're going down the river. So technically, because it has a paddle wheel on it, it is a paddle wheel boat, but it's not driven by it. But it's a beautiful boat. We went up the West Branch, out west on the West Branch of the Susquehanna for about a half an hour, and then came back and got to see some lovely scenery and learn some history of the area. How Pennsylvania and Williamsport used to be the timber capital of the world at one time. So it was very interesting day. And then we went, took my lovely bride out to Red Lobster for dinner. Now, this week's going to be a short broadcast week because Friday is my anniversary. It's the 1st of September. It's our anniversary. I will not be broadcasting a show on Friday either this week. I do apologize. Sometimes we're going to have this, especially around special occasions like this, and I'm not. Me and my wife want to do a couple more things on Friday in the morning while my daughter's not here. She's at her program, so we can take care of a few of those things like that. So, without further ado, today's show is being brought to you by an affiliate marketer of mine, Bluehost. If you go to danclementshow.com, at the top of the page, you'll see the Bluehost icon. You click on that, and it'll take you over there to Bluehost, and that's who I use for the danclementshow.com show notes page. And I'll continue as I build out my brand and add other websites. I'm going to be using Bluehost. I think they're fantastic. They do a good job, good customer service. And if you buy your domain name through them, you'll get, if you buy your hosting service through them, you get a free domain, free site builder, a one-click WordPress install, 24/7 support, and with that domain you get email addresses, the whole shebang. For whatever it is, a blog, you're promoting something, an industry, a business, or something like that. So go on over to danclementshow.com and click on the Bluehost widget at the top of the page, and it'll help support the show. Plus, it'll give you some really good hosting options if you're planning on getting on the internet and promoting your business or whatever hobby, a blog, you want to get political like I have, things like that. So you'll be able to do so. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. What we have, God has blessed us with. We're just stewards as we pass through this world. We can't take our possessions with us. Eventually someone else is going to get those. So we need to honor the Lord with our possessions and our first fruits. And if we do that, our barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with wine. In other words, we'll be blessed if we do that. Today's quote meal comes from one of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge. Silent Cal, as they used to call him. It is only when man begins to worship that they begin to grow. It's only when men begin to worship that they begin to grow. Short Bible lesson today. Love isn't the only thing that matters, but it matters most, by Wes McAdams. And this is radicallychristian.com. He posted this today. And I think that's very, very, very important. Love isn't the only thing that matters, but it matters the most. We definitely need to keep that in mind while we're doing things. All right, folks. Real quick here, I just was informed I have to go do something here real quick. So I'm. Why am I not? Why don't I see my? Okay, it does show me that I'm live now. I want to see my channel though. I can't see my channel. I am going to show you one of my videos while I go take care of something real quick. I do apologize for this that's going on. Let me get down to one of my playlists here. All right, hang on just a second, folks. Oh, I gotta open up a playlist. Hang on a second. I know, folks, this isn't what you were expecting, and I know that. Something just came up, and I just want to take you over to one of these so I can take care of this real quick. All right, let me put this one on, and we'll get going here. Okay. Oh, here we go. I don't even have to use the fair use on this at all. All right. Well, hello, fellow constitutionalists, and I want to talk to you today a little bit about religion and politics, since this is a Christian political talk show that I put out every day. And this article came across my desk, and I shared it on Friday's show this week. It's called Religion and Politics at the Dinner Table, Challenging the Old Maxim. This is by Christopher W. Love over at thepublicdiscourse.com. Now, this is a Witherspoon Institute program that they got going on. And folks, I encourage you to bookmark thepublicdiscourse.com. They put out some very good, thought-provoking articles. Now, you may not agree with everything in all the articles, depending on your point of view from anti-freedom to freedom, but this is a good one because this is something I do on a daily basis. I mix politics and Christianity and religion, as it were, and I want to bring it from this standpoint that I think we do a disservice, and like Christopher points out, we do a disservice on the way we train up our children. Now, we should train up our children in the way they should go. And this works, folks, this works whether you're talking about religion or not. If you train your children to grow up to be a hater and a racist and stuff like that, that's the way they're going to go. And I'm not saying they can never be changed or their mind can never be changed, but I'm just saying the way you train a child up is the way they go. If you train your child up to seek freedom and liberty for themselves and everybody around them, and train them in this type of ideology, that's the way they're going to tend to go too. If you train your children up to be Christians, more times than not, I'm not saying it's 100% because it's not, but more times than not, they will go that way. And even sometimes when they stray from the path, sometimes they'll come back. But it all boils down to a lot of times at our dinner tables or in our homes, we do not allow our children to express themselves politically. And this is very dangerous, folks. Excuse me, because I don't want automatons going out in society. I don't want my children to be afraid of asking tough questions or challenging their own ideologies or challenging somebody else's ideologies. And if I can't give them, and this is the gist of this article that I'm going to cover, that you can go and get. I have the links at the bottom of the video here. if you don't allow them to exercise their gray matter up here to start critically thinking about things and encourage talking about politics, even at the dinner table, or religion, even at the dinner table, I think you're doing a disservice to your children, and you're making them ill prepared for life. We have a group in college now, for the past few years, that have been ill prepared for life. They don't know what it means to have their ideas challenged. What they grew up in was an echo chamber where all their thoughts and ideas were reinforced instead of challenged, especially if they're not reasoned through and they're not truthful and fact-based, in which they should be challenged. And this really should begin at home. And why should this begin at home? Well, it's easier. Their brains are a little more malleable when they're younger while they're at home. So it's easier to train your child at it from a younger age. But again, I'm not talking about indoctrination, even religion. I'm not talking about indoctrination. I'm talking about sitting them down, showing them the principles and the as far as like the New Testament, showing them the New Testament, showing them the principles of Christianity through the New Testament, through God's Word, and sit down and discuss it with them. And trust me, I'll tell you, they're going to have a lot of questions for you, and you need to have the answers or sit down and study the answers together. And this is not unlike politics. There's a lot of things that are going on in this world that you may not know, but you may get asked that question. So the best thing to do is sit down and discuss it with your children, and sit down and study it together, research it together, try to find out the truth and the facts of the matter. You be open-minded to ideas that are foreign to you, and your child will be open-minded to them also. Another reason why to do this, and when you do this, not another reason why, but when you do this at home, you need to keep the peace. Remember, as a parent, you don't have all the answers. As a child, they don't have all the answers, but guess what? Somewhere in the middle, through your studying, through your debating, through your peaceful discussions, your loving discussions about either Christianity or religion and politics or whatever else it might be, you're not going to be hurting each other's feelings. And if your child has a different idea than what you think is orthodox or you think is correct, you shouldn't yell at them or anything like that or try to correct them sternly. You just sit down and reason with them. And when you do that, I think you go a lot further and it's a lot better for you. When, how, and why you should do these things. And again, it should be done in a peaceful atmosphere, sort of maybe controlled atmosphere, without a lot of outside influence. What happens a lot when you get into these political discussions, if you have a big group of people, and this is where comes the when or why or how or even where, I'll add that on to there, you get too many voices talking. So if there's a serious question that's brought up to you, it's okay to take that child aside and sit down and talk to them by themselves without all the rest of the kids or the family together. And I'm not talking about taking them in a private room so you can beat them if they don't agree with you. I mean, sit down, have the other kids go watch TV, sit down at the kitchen table, maybe you have a cup of coffee, they have a soft drink or something like that, and sit down and discuss these things. And how you do it is just as important as when and where you do it. So these things you got to sort of figure out on yourself, but it's most important. And I think if you have this type of band in your family, and the author here in this talks about challenging, a challenge to lift the band. What Christopher Love is talking about is we need to get out of our cocoons like this, and we need to seriously talk to our children about religion and politics. Even if it's at the dinner table over a meal. Keep it civil. If there's a serious question, there's too many voices coming in there, and the child wants an answer to that question, sometimes you have to divide the herd, as it was, and sit down and talk to that child by themselves. Or if a couple of them have the same question, sit down with the group of them, depending on how many kids you have. I remember as a scoutmaster, we did this a lot over the campfire. The boys brought it up. I never brought it up. The boys brought up questions for scoutmasters, and we talk about it. And sometimes it was economics, sometimes it was religion, sometimes it was politics, sometimes it didn't have anything related to any of those. It was just another question in life. And we were more than willing to sit down and talk with the child and challenge. We would challenge them, even though they may be right, even though they did agree with us. My habit was to challenge them to make sure they knew why they believe what they believe. And I think that can be done in a loving, caring manner. But what's happening in our society today is too many people raise these children up, and they're in an echo chamber. You believe the way I believe, and that's it. We're not going to discuss it. You don't have a safe haven here at the house to discuss these ideas. And when they get out in the world and they get these multitude of voices coming against them, no wonder why they want to find a safe space, because they're not used to having this type of discussion or debate. Folks, if you like these videos, if you especially like this video, please give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. If you like what I'm doing here, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification, and as always, please, if you want to comment on this, I don't personally attack folks. I attack ideas and policies and stuff like that. Leave a comment why you liked it, why you disliked it, and I'll try to get back with you as quick as I can with some comments if it's warranted. So you guys have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you on the next video. All right, folks, sorry about that. It was something that was unavoidable I had to take care of real quick. And normally this doesn't happen during the show. At least I don't remember it happening during the show. So I do apologize. I hope you liked that little short video that I did there. And I got to reset my page here to get back to an article that I wanted to show you guys and talk to you guys about when I get down to it. Now, our hearts and prayers go out to all the folks down in Houston, Louisiana that are really having a lot of problems, okay, because of the flooding and because of the hurricane. And I know this may not be the best time to talk about this, but, you know, there's never a good time to talk about people's choices. There just isn't, you know, because no matter what you do, somebody's always going to get upset at you for, and I'm not actually condemning the folks down there as far as any type of government regulations or anything that they did personally per se. Okay, we're not going to be able to stop hurricanes, folks. Man-made global warming is a myth, and it didn't cause this powerful hurricane. It's just something that happens a lot. But the problem with the Houston area, with the Louisiana area, especially New Orleans, the problem when you have these catastrophic, you know, biblical storms like this that just dump billions of tons of rain in one area in a short period of time, is the location they're being built. And not only the location, but the government regulations, especially the federal government regulations, that make these natural disasters worse. And what I'm talking about is the National Flood Insurance. And I have a couple personal stories with this. And let me get out of, for some reason I got my desktop audio still going. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that wasn't echoing back on you. I didn't hear it echo in my ears there. So the National Flood Insurance has unintended consequences. Now you hear me talking about unintended consequences when it comes to economics all the time. And I have a bunch of stories in my show notes page today that go along with my title, Government Regulations Make Natural Disasters Worse. And John Stossel has a video, I don't know if I'll be able to dig it up, but he has a video talking about how he had a beach house that was flooded out a couple times and destroyed by storms. And because of his federal flood insurance that he had, taxpayer dollars helped him rebuild his property. And the question is, and the question he asked other folks and himself, if he didn't have this federal flood insurance backing him up, would he have rebuilt there? Because his regular insurance wouldn't cover him for this. So he got federal disaster or federal flood insurance, and that helped cover this. And the answer to this question would have been no. If it wouldn't have been for the federal program for flood insurance and disaster, he would not have rebuilt there because his insurance didn't cover it, and he'd have to pay for it out of pocket. And this is the point I'm trying to bring up today on the program, is because of something someone else or an agency or an entity does, oftentimes affects us in ways sometimes we don't even understand or comprehend. Now, I was just over a couple weeks ago, my nephew's birthday in Sunbury, and you can look this up in the history of Sunbury and Google Maps and see they have a flood control and flood wall and all that kind of stuff. Most, not all, but the mass or the major majority of Sunbury is within the floodplain. If it wasn't for the flood wall, there'd be a lot more disasters and a lot more damage done to the houses along the Susquehanna River. And Sunbury's just below the confluence of where the west branch of the Susquehanna and the north branch come together, and they form one that goes down to Chesapeake Bay. And before the flood wall was built, there was a lot of flooding that's going on. Matter of fact, straight across the river from Sunbury, you have the road going between Smoking Dam and Northumberland, that when it gets up to a certain height, it doesn't even have to be that high on the Sunbury flood wall. You can't even use that road, and luckily there's no houses over there, but you can't even use that road because the waters have overflown its banks and are in there. Now, having said all that, I got in a conversation with my brother-in-law who lives in Sunbury, and I asked him how much was his flood insurance running for his house. And he's like, we don't carry flood insurance on our house. And I said, are you sure? You guys live in a flood zone? No, we pay taxes for the flood wall, so we don't have to have flood insurance. And I'm like, there was a huge flood back in 72, and this was after the flood wall, 1972 Agnes, that literally flooded into the first stories of most of the houses. Didn't go all the way up the first story, but got well into the first story of most of the houses, and his would have been one of them. And somebody has to pay for that. And if you don't have flood insurance on your policy, then your insurance agent's going to deny you any claims on that. And I cautioned him. I said, and my brother-in-law, he's the type that if he thinks he's right, he won't check anything else out. I cautioned him. I said, I would check with your insurance agent to make sure you don't have to carry a flood insurance policy on your house. Or if you're relying on that wall and the wall fails, is the city going to pay for it? He couldn't answer those questions. And this is, folks, this is where this is what happens in life. People don't think about these things and don't ask these questions. One of the reasons why we wanted to live out in Snydertown where we're at is we don't live in a floodplain. Our house is not in a floodplain. The property that I own with this house is not in a floodplain. And I'm not saying natural disasters may not befall us. I mean, we've been through hurricanes here and had minor home damage, tree damage around the area and stuff like that, power outage, the whole 9 yards. But we don't live in a floodplain. And there's two good reasons for that. One, I don't want to have to do the work in case a natural disaster comes around and ruins things in my house, i.e. a flood. Because I've helped other people recover from their floods. Folks out on the Isle of Q down in Selinsgrove, there was a major flood back in 2011, I think it was. And they really went underwater back then. Matter of fact, it might have been a couple years after that, but there was major flooding, and those houses on the Isle of Q have been flooded before, and they'll be flooded again because there's no flood control. Now, some of the houses have rebuilt and elevated their house and have a concrete garage below, and it's real easy for them to throw things on a trailer and get them out of there, take them to a friend's house that's not going to be effective. Other folks don't have that. They open up their basement windows so they don't get the water pressure to blow in their, they have basements. And if you don't open the windows and you try to stop the water from coming in your basement, there can be enough water pressure, especially on the older foundations, that you can blow out a foundation wall. So most of the residents out there that aren't up on an elevated basement or anything, they know this, and they just go down. They don't keep anything in their basements. They just go down and open up the windows. And when the floodwaters come up, it has a place to go, and it doesn't ruin their foundation. So, there are sacrifices that folks make to live out there. But most of those folks out there, because of where their house is, they can't get flood insurance. So a lot of the damage that happens is not covered by their insurance policies. And so they try to get as much things out of their house as they can, or, they're minimalists when it comes to the first floor. The one friend of ours out there, we went out there and got some things out of there, including her riding mower, because it went through a flood before, and we got it fixed up. And when the flood hit again, I think in 2011 was Hurricane Ivan, and she got her lawnmower ruined. But we took it in, got it all fixed up, water taken out of the crankcase, and everything done up, and it worked. It worked fine, and she didn't want that to happen again, and I didn't blame her, so we got that out of there and a couple other things. But my point is, they live there in spite of the risks. But even they can't get, out there on the island, they can't get, as far as I know, they can't get federal flood insurance because of that. And I don't understand how some of these other people do when they live in floodplains. I don't I'm not exactly sure all of the workings of that. I'd love to get an insurance guy on here to talk to us about this. And I might even try to, I'd like to try to get that done, this week or next week, because I think it would be fascinating to sort of pick somebody's mind that knows a lot about property insurance and stuff like that. But it amazes me how many of these people get flooded out, like on the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Mississippi Delta down in New Orleans. That city's literally under sea level. And they have dikes and they have big pumping stations and stuff like that to keep the rainwater and stuff out. It's just to build the whole city there to begin with, I think was foolish and foolhardy. And that's just my opinion. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think it was foolhardy to do so, because look at what happened during Katrina. I have a series of articles in here. Like, I know they're going to frustrate some folks, because there's people that are still possibly in harm's way. And like I said, there's nothing I can do about that. I think they have more than enough people down there with boats. I mean, the Redneck Brigade got in there with their boats. And I'm not talking about Antifa either, folks. I'm talking about the Redneck Brigade got in with their fishing boats and stuff. And the Coast Guard said they got plenty of help to get people out of there. They're still in sort of like a rescue mode. They're not in recovery mode yet. They're getting folks to shelters. There was... my Facebook antagonist Kimberly Eaton shared an article blasting Joel Osteen and his response to the to what was going on in down in Houston. Like, he wasn't opening up his church. And let me get over there and set things up real quick here. Just want to get one thing settled in on this before I read this article, and before I get over to it. Okay. All right, here we are here with the Think Americana article, and this was updated on the 29th, which was yesterday, Tuesday. Joel Osteen responds to fake news about his closing doors to Hurricane Harvey evacuees. Now, I'm not going to play the whole video here. There was, if you've been through this and been following this story, and if you're like me, you're real suspicious of the lamestream media and their supporters, like some of my Facebook antagonists. And basically, what was being said there was, now this here. I'm showing some pictures right here, and I'm told that this was in the building, in the basement of the building. I guess the building does have a basement, okay? And flooding was taking place down the basement of the building. I think a little bit of the auditorium or somewhere. I'm not sure where this is here. You see my pointer there. But these are some pictures that were taken during this flood, and this was inside the building and also outside of the building, folks. You couldn't get to it on the streets up until like sometime yesterday, and they were coordinating with city officials. And I'm like, okay, they're coordinating with city officials, and people are criticizing Joel Osteen and the Lakewood Church there in Houston of not opening up their doors. And they were trying to get people in there to help do some things. And they were doing some other things. I'm going to get out of this before these ads get too wild on there. And they were literally there trying to help and work, but they were also coordinating with the city and the county and whoever else was coordinating all these shelters. And they already had started sending people to these other shelters, and because they couldn't get to the Lakewood Church building, and so people just globbed onto that. Well, Mr. Osteen wasn't allowing his church, the 56,000 seat church, to be used for shelter. And that just wasn't the case. These people were jumping the gun about this. Again, I guess the streets were impassable up until a day ago to even get there. They're there now, and they're gathering supplies in there, and they're giving out supplies. And they said as soon as they're talking with the county and the city and everything like that. And when these other shelters come up, they're more than welcome to use that. They're in the loop. They're in the pipeline, as it were, so that all this coordination can go on. Because if you can imagine, what would happen if there wasn't some type of, in a situation like this, if there wasn't some type of information collection center of where these storm refugees, as they were, these victims of Hurricane Harvey or any natural disaster, if to know where they're going, so if family members are worried about them, can't get a hold of them, at least they can try to find out where they went to. Okay, and so I can see the coordination there was going on there, but this idea, and I was skeptical of it to begin with. And look, I'm not a big fan of Mr. Olstein. He doesn't preach the whole gospel. He doesn't preach the truth about salvation and that. But that's my bugaboo with him. But I didn't think that he was the type of person that was just going to shut the building up and not allow it to be used at all. I never bought that for a second. But yet the anti-Christians and the lamestream media, especially my anti-Christian detractors on Facebook, see how bad you Christians are. This guy here, this Joel Osteen, he's not allowing his church to be used. Oh, what a travesty. And that just wasn't the case. So again, the lamestream media heats again, and their narrative echo chamber followers are following right on their heels. And so it's real, like I said, I didn't believe it for a second to begin with, and there was a real good reason why. One, you couldn't get to the building till yesterday. And two, they're coordinating with the county and the city or whoever the authorities were that were in charge of the shelters, and they're absolutely in the pipeline for that. So, I don't believe hardly anything the lamestream media has to say about anything anymore. But I do have these articles here. I have one here from Carlene Baum over at Foundation for Economic Education. No, hurricanes are not good for the economy. Now, you'll hear this spouted a lot with natural disasters all over the place. Oh, look at the boon for the contractors. Look at the boon for the material suppliers to build homes or whatever. Gatlinburg, Tennessee, the big forest fire that took out resorts and everything. Look at the boon that it's going to be for all these other industries. But the problem with that boon is, where did the money come from? And also, what about the lost revenues while they're closed, waiting to be rebuilt, even if they rebuild or not? We don't know that. And so here again, this goes back to Frederick Bastiat and his in the book called The Law, talking about the tailor's window. About how the tailor got his window broken. You heard me talk about this before, and he had to use money that he was going to use to buy another sewing machine to increase production. How much of this money, and not all this is going to be covered by insurance, how much of this money from the people, from businesses, from industries that are down there, the oil industry, the refineries and stuff like that, how much lost production, how much lost work time because folks have to take off work to clean up their home and maybe cut sheetrock off to a certain level and get rid of the wet insulation and spray, if they buy moldicides, and to take care of the mold and everything like that, and replace a lot of things. How much lost production are you going to have there? And how much more money would they had to put into the economy if this disaster hadn't happened? And so there's a lot of unseen things in these natural disasters that folks just don't realize. All they see is the dollars. Oh man, these people are going to, these contractors aren't going to be making money. That's going to put money back in the economy. And that's true to a certain extent, but it's off. It's not balanced out correctly with lost production, lost work time by employees who have to take care of the things in their house so their family has a house to come back to live in. So this idea that natural disasters are good for the economy has been a fallacy that's been around for a long, long time. And it amazes me how it still continues to be a fallacy that's going around. I'm just bringing up some other articles here like that. And like I said, I brought that up because you're going to hear this in the fake news media, the lamestream media, and you're going to hear a lot of socialists, democratic socialists out there that are Keynesian economists that are going to tout this, that just look at the spur of the economy, the local economy, the contractors, and the whole nine yards out there. So, like I said, it amazes me that this ideology is still going around when it's totally provable that this isn't necessarily the case. Caroline goes on here. Once the immediate danger of natural disaster subsides and the loss of life, property damage, and cost of rebuilding and degree of insurance coverage can be assessed, attention generally turns to the economic effect. How will Hurricane Harvey affect the nation's gross domestic product? Well, you will no doubt hear assertions that the rebuilding effort will provide a boost to contractors, manufacturers, and GDP in general. But before these claims turn into predictable nonsense about all the good that comes from natural disasters, I thought it might be useful to provide some context for these sorts of events. The destruction wrought by a hurricane and flooding qualifies as a negative supply shock. Normal production and distribution channels are destroyed or disrupted. Producers have to find less efficient, more expensive ways to transport their goods, and the net effect is lost output and income and higher prices. Now, let me stop the reading there. We bought fuel. I filled up my wife's car I guess we did yesterday morning before we went up to Williamsport. With the 17-cent discount at the local service station where we get our gas sometimes, we paid $2.32 a gallon. Okay, regularly $2.49 a gallon. By the time we went up to Williamsport, went on the boat ride, went over to Red Lobster, had a nice lunch, and then came back down and passed the same gas station that we had filled up at, the price jumped from $2.49 to $2.55 in that span of hours. And I really don't even want to see where it's going to go to after that. Because refining fuel oil, gasoline, diesel fuel, home heating oil, a lot of that takes place down in Louisiana, Texas area. Because of stupid government regulations on not building new refineries and taking care of stuff like that. And hopefully after this disaster gets out, hopefully, President Trump sees the need to get rid of an executive order, a Bush era executive order. And I think it might have even been before Bush, but I remember it came up during Bush, and I have to look this up, that no offshore drilling on the continental United States, like the Atlantic Pacific coast, and no new refineries that are being built. And so our country is in a real refining crunch when it comes to refining crude oil and let's say just gasoline alone. So this is going to impact our numbers. I wouldn't doubt that our fuel prices won't jump up close to $3 a gallon before this is all said and done, before they get the refineries back down there online and get them pumping the gasoline out and other lubricants and diesel fuel and stuff like that makes our economy go. And they call this a negative supply shock. So right now our prices are $2.49. So if they just go up to $3 a gallon just to make everything easy, that's a 51 cent a gallon increase that we the people, the commuters, have to absorb that. And so we have to take extra money out of our budget somewhere to pay for that so we get back and forth to work. You see what I'm saying here? So it has a negative effect on the whole economy. The local economy, some contractors and some national suppliers of whatever, gypsum board, sheetrock, insulation, doors, whatever, furniture, they might get a temporary boost. But the problem even with that boost, and follow my logic here, because of the negative supply shock with let's say just the fuel, the diesel fuel for the trucks to haul all this material, it's going to cost more to get these goods to where they need to be, which means the folks that are down there are going to have to pay more for the goods that they would normally had to buy because of the natural disaster. So you're going to hear a lot of this in the news and on talk radio, on shows, especially ones that don't have. And like I said, I'm not an economist, but I understand these things. To me, this concept of negative supply shock is easy to understand. This idea of the broken window theory of the economy is a falsity. It doesn't jive, it doesn't work. As they might say in the backwoods, that dog just don't hunt. And so we're going to hear a lot of these down here. And this is a good article. I encourage you to go over and read that. And again, these show notes will be over the show notes page at thedanclementshow.com, episode 874. I have another one here. I have a couple here. Let me see here. Let me read this one first because these ones just fascinate me. These people that want all these regulations. Let's see. Houston is drowning. Here it is. Houston is drowning in its freedom from regulations. This is by Steve Russell over at Newsweek.com. He posted this on Monday. Now, Houston is the biggest city in the country that does not have zoning laws. So you can pretty much build anywhere. And part of the problem that has been done, especially in the northwest corner of Houston, is they've paved over wetlands. Now, wetlands can absorb a lot of water, from my research. They wouldn't have absorbed everything that Harvey put down, so don't get me wrong on that, but they could have lessened the flooding damage. But what happens is you pave over these wetlands, and then where does the water go? It's not being absorbed. It's got to flow somewhere. The roads are, become like rivers, and you've seen all the pictures of everything. So Steve Russell says it's freedom from regulation. It really isn't. He starts off the article here. So we do value our freedom here in Texas. As I write from soggy Central Texas, the cable news is showing people floating down Buffalo Bayou on their principles. Proud residents of the largest city in the United States that did not grow in accordance with zoning ordinances. The feeling there was that persons who own real estate should be free to develop it as they wish. Houston, also known as the Bayou City, is a great location because of its access to international shipping in the Gulf of Mexico. It is not a great location for building, though, because of its impervious cover. If water could easily sink into the ground, there would be less of it ripping down Houston's rivers that just a week ago were overcrowded streets. And he's absolutely right here, but it's not the zoning laws. It really isn't. It's these folks that get this flood insurance from the federal government to get covered on these things, that build their houses on these wetlands and these swampy areas instead of, and look, I grew up on an area of northern Ohio called the Great Onion Swamp. And farmers were draining that. We had huge drainage ditches. I mean, if you can almost lose a tractor trailer in some of these drainage ditches around these farm fields. They're so big to try to keep the swamp, the water at bay. I mean, where we lived at the edge of the swamp, you couldn't have basements unless you built up the ground, but you couldn't have basements where we're at because you dig a couple feet down. 3 feet, I think, was about in where our house, we lived outside of Findlay, you'd hit water. Water start percolating up the ground. It was an old swamp that we built over. And because of that, when it got really, really rainy, things got real soggy around there. And there's a lot of low-lying areas around Findlay, Ohio, including in Findlay. So when they get a lot of rain and things happen around there and they get too much rain, it floods real easy. So I do have some experience of living on a reclaimed swamp. But the thing is, the farmers had to keep up with the drainage in their fields. If they didn't, it would revert back to a swampy mess that they couldn't plow or anything. So they, or cultivate, and grow crops and stuff like that. So they were constantly going through and laying new drainage tile. When I was growing up there, they were replacing the old terracotta pipes with the new plastic pipes that they knifed into the ground. Great big machine with a big wheel on it would do that. So what I'm saying here is, people, honestly, I think people are foolish for building in floodplains. Again, me and my wife, that was one thing we did talk about when we moved out here, because she remembered Agnes, that she didn't want to live in town there. We live out in a little town outside of Sunbury, and it can rain all at once. If it gets up to my back porch, we're in trouble. If it gets up to my back porch, I'm looking for an ark to float by sooner or later, because we're talking about a flood of massive biblical proportions if it gets to my back stoop. That's how far above sea level we are here. So he's right in one respect, that it's lack of regulations, but it's also insurance companies should be telling these folks, look, you can build there if you want, but we're not going to cover you if it floods. We're not going to cover any damage to your furniture, your house, or nothing. Now, the government can come in and say, well, look, force the insurance companies to, if you want to operate here, you got to give these guys flood insurance. The federal government does the same thing. My brother-in-law, he's not living in the house now. He used to have a house up by Bloomsburg, and the creek would flood every now and then. And the last time it did, it got like 2 or 3 feet up in the first floor, and it never did that before. And the reason why it backed up in his particular area that much is they were doing some construction just down the creek, and one of the construction trailers got in the creek and got underneath the bridge and got stuck, and it backed up a bunch of debris, and therefore it backed the water up behind him and really did some damage there. But again, he didn't get near the money that he needed out of flood insurance or the federal government or anything. I don't know if he ever got anything out of FEMA. He filed for it, but they were declining a lot of applications. So we stripped the insulation and the sheetrock and dug out the basement and cleaned everything up. We filled a whole big dumpster up with just stuff, his furniture and stuff that just got ruined. And he ended up selling the house for little or nothing, basically what he owed on it, to a contractor. And now where they live outside of Danville, they're up on the side of a hill, and there's no way it's going to flood up there. But you see what I'm saying there? They made that decision. They made that decision not to live in that flood zone. So Houston is a free city with very little zoning at all, especially in the residential areas, these are deemed residential, but they don't, again, they're doing things I think are stupid. Building on swamps, building in bayous. It's called the Bayou City for a reason, and not building on higher ground. And again, these places like that are good for, commercial, ocean-going businesses and stuff like that. But, and I've been down to Houston a lot of times. I've been there, when it's rained hard and it was getting flooded, not like they are now, but when I was driving a truck, there was a couple of times there was some streets and highways you couldn't go on because they were underwater, but they were in the real low-lying areas. And I can see, and I like Houston, but I would never live around there. I'd live more further north myself, but I wouldn't live in a flood zone. I'm just not going to do that. So there's that article you can go see on there. Houston is drowning it in its freedom from regulations. And again, if people just use some common sense, I don't know any, honestly, and I haven't talked to anybody personally because I don't know that many people that live in floodplains except over here on the Isle of Q, and I understand what they're saying. They just accept the risk, and they know the insurance company isn't going to cover anything. Okay, if you go into it with your eyes wide open and you still do it, that's up to you. To me, I think it's still foolish behavior, but you're not costing me anything. And what happens is when you start costing the taxpayer dollars, because they're going to get disaster relief down there. There's charities and organizations setting up hotlines that you can donate for rebuilding Houston and stuff down there. But again, I think people need to slow down a little bit and ask themselves, why do people need to rebuild in those areas that are prone to something like this? I think it's a good question. I don't think it's being asked enough. I think it really is a good question on that. I have this other article that sort of refutes this freedom from regulation, and this is one I really want to get into from Powerline blog. Was Houston disaster man-made? And I think he hits the nail on the head. John Hinderaker, August 29th of this year. Hurricane Harvey wasn't man-made, obviously, but the scale of the destruction was, in large part, in unintended consequences by government policy. Michael Grunwald reports at Political how Washington made Harvey worse. Nearly 2 decades before the storm's historic assault on the homes and businesses along the Gulf Coast of Texas this week, the National Wildlife Federation released a groundbreaking report about the United States government's dysfunctional flood insurance program, demonstrating how it was making catastrophes worse by encouraging Americans to build and rebuild in flood-prone areas. Report titled Higher Ground crunched federal data to show that just 2% of the program's insured properties were receiving 40% of its damage claims. The most egregious example was a home that was flooded 16 times in 18 years, netting its owners more than $800,000, even though it was valued at less than $115,000 home. So in that instance, folks, it would have been cheaper just to relocate the home out of the flood zone. Matter of fact, we have a house down here at the bottom of our town that built in the flood zone was sued by the borough because they didn't get the permits and everything. They just went and built anyway. And we do have zoning regulations in the borough here. And because of his deep pockets, we tried to sue him. The borough tried to sue him, but they couldn't afford to pursue that. So he built there anyway. And as far as I know, I don't know if he has federal flood insurance. And like I said, I don't know how the whole program works and how they can get flood insurance when their house is in a floodplain. That boggles my mind. Of course, it's the government. It's bureaucratic thinking there. Anyway, that home was located in Houston, along with more than half of America's worst repetitive loss properties identified in the report. Houston's problem was runaway development in flood-prone areas, accelerated by heavily subsidized federal flood insurance. Now the Hurricane Harvey has turned Conrad's warning into reality. It's worth noting that Houston's problem was in part a Washington problem, a slow-motion disaster that was easy to predict but politically impossible to prevent. Hurricane Harvey is the first costly flood to hit Houston since 1998 report. In 2001, Tropical Storm Allison dumped more than 2 feet of rain on the city, causing about $5 billion in damage. Two relatively modest storms hit Houston in 2015, 2016. So small they didn't get names, did so much property damage that they made the list of the 15 highest priced floods in U.S. history. But Houston's low-lying flatlands keep booming as sprawling subdivisions and parking lots pave over the wetlands and pastures that used to soak up the area's excessive rainfall, which is how Houston's managed to host the 500-year floods in the past 3 years. I don't mean to laugh. I mean, it's a tragedy down there, but this is a tragedy that man has created for himself. People have been talking about the perverse consequences of federal flood insurance for a long time, but nothing has been done. Congress enacted a semblance of reform in 2012, providing for premiums that more closely reflect the risk of flooding the floodplains, but political pressure led Congress to retreat in 2014. Hurricane Harvey will most likely result in more federal spending on flood relief and more unintended consequences in the future rather than fewer. And again, I'm going to look this up and do a little research tonight on federal flood insurance. And let me just make a note here before the show ends here. And just try to get a handle on why these people that live in floodplains are able to get this federal flood insurance. Doesn't make sense to me. Insurance companies that would insure a house there, I guess they can get. I guess folks, in the way I understand it through some of these articles I've read, can get this subsidized taxpayer. You're subsidizing. I'm subsidizing this flood insurance to allow these people to build in these flood zones instead of building around them. And again, after a disaster like this, why are they being let to rebuild in these same flood zones? Because it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. It seems like it's happened a lot down in Houston. And there's another article you can go read. I'm getting to the end of the show here. There's another article I think is very good. Houston's flood damage, chronic, expensive, and avoidable. It goes along with that. Was Houston a man-made disaster? It goes right along with that. You know, about all the paving over the bayous and the swamps and the concrete that they use and the asphalt they use is impervious to water instead of letting the water filter down through. I guess they have some of that concrete and that asphalt that they can use to sort of mitigate some of that. But again, if you build in a swamp, especially a coastal swamp like that, and you got a storm surge and all that rain, there's no place for the water to go. Eventually that swamp's going to fill up, and once the swamp fills up, you're still going to get some damage. And so I just, I don't know, I'm just, it makes me laugh. And I'm not laughing at the people's, you know, they're going through this hardship down there. An organization I support, the Church of Christ Disaster Relief out of Tennessee, has already set up shop down there. They're shipping food and cleaning supplies and water and stuff like that down there. Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis, Missouri, switched from brewing beer to canning water, and they do this a lot in these natural disasters and shipping it down there. A lot of these when I was a dispatcher, we sent, during Katrina, we sent truckloads of water down there through a broker down to Houston, because we had some owner-operators that would go that far. We didn't normally go that far, but we had some owner-operators that would take it down there and they staged it at warehouses and come right back up. But, there's a lot of disaster relief going on that doesn't even have anything to do with the government. And I think I don't think it's going to take Houston that long to get back on its feet. I don't think it's going to take that long for the economy to get back on its feet, because they've been here before, and they'll recover from this. However, I think going forward there has to be something done with the bureaucracy that just keeps allowing this to happen. One more thing before we go here. This is something I've been doing some research on Antifa. I'm trying to write an ebook about American Antifa. And I'm doing a lot of research on this. And I come across this article that was posted back in 2014 that FBI dumped Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate crimes resource. Now that's 3 years ago. But you have folks like Facebook and Twitter they're using the Southern Poverty Law Center to determine what hate speech is and what possible hate groups might be on their feeds. And yet the FBI won't even use them anymore. It's because of their skewed ideology down at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and how they won't denounce groups like Antifa as a hate group, but they'll take churches and stuff like that, or the Constitution Party. We're a hate group, and one of the reasons why we're a hate group, because we like actual history, true factual history, and we espouse it and we teach it, especially when it comes to the Constitution. Oh, that's hateful. Oh. That's hateful to tell people the truth, especially about your own country's history. And I was like, what? What did he say? So I thought this was funny as I was going through my research. It's been almost 3 years. March 2014. It's been over 3 years that the FBI has dumped the SPLC as an indicator of who hate groups are. So if the FBI doesn't use you anymore, I don't think Facebook or Twitter or any of these other groups, Google, should be using them either. But again, SPLC is a very anti-freedom group. They support very progressive social democratic causes out there. So it's no wonder that they get a cover from the mainstream media and all these anti-freedom political groups and social groups out there. So, all right, folks, like I said, maybe it was too soon for this show, but I don't think so. I think it's never too soon to start talking about the truth. Especially when there's issues like this that hit the nation as hard as Harvey has hit Houston, and going to be hitting Louisiana here pretty soon. So, folks, that's the music. That's the end of the show. It's been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon. And remember, I'm not going to have a show on Friday, but we'll see you tomorrow at noon. Oh, and if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.